Citylight family. JD Senkbile here. I'm one of the pastors over at Citylight Benson. This last Sunday, we kicked off our series, God Redeems, a journey through the book of Exodus. And one of the things that we want to do as pastors is to put out a couple of videos every week just to supplement Sunday's teaching to help you as you work through this book in your city group or individually. As we opened up Exodus chapters 1 and 2, we find God's people in slavery in the nation of Egypt. And so I wanted to take a moment today just to set the context. How did they get here? What is going on? And so let's go back to Abraham. As we find Abraham in Genesis chapter 12, sin has already entered into the world. God's good and perfect creation has been fractured. Man has rebelled. And so God establishes a plan of redemption, a plan to save man. And he begins by calling Abraham and by giving him a promise to make him into a great nation. And one of the things that we see throughout Scripture, one of the major themes of the Bible, is that God is faithful. And we see this with Abraham. God promises him a son, and he gives him a son named Isaac. And Isaac has a son named Jacob. And it's with Jacob that we really see God's promise to make Abraham's descendants into a great nation start to come to fruition. Jacob has 12 sons that eventually become the 12 tribes of Israel. And you may remember one of Jacob's sons, Joseph. And the story of Joseph is that his brothers sold him into slavery, into Egypt. And so we wonder along the way, what is going on? Is God being faithful to Joseph? But the story reveals that God had a plan, that even in Joseph's suffering, God was working for the good of his people. And Joseph raises in power. He actually becomes second in command in Egypt, only to Pharaoh. And he's able to provide for his family. And so his brothers actually come looking for food because of a great famine that's in the land. And Joseph is in the place to serve them. And so we find at the end of the book of Genesis that Joseph sits with his brothers and he forgives them. It's this powerful scene. He says, "Do not fear, for am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today." So God had a plan. Even in Joseph's trials and in his suffering, God was working for his good. And so as we open up the book of Exodus, we should be remembering that God told Abraham in Genesis chapter 15, he says, "Then the Lord said to Abram, know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in a land that is not theirs, and will be servants there, and they will be afflicted for 400 years. But I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve, and afterward they shall come out with great possessions." So we see God had a plan even as he sent them into Egypt. And as they remain there and become enslaved by Pharaoh, that God had already promised Abraham that he would bring them out and take them into the promised land. And so we want to look as we see this story in Exodus that God is going to be faithful to his people, that he's going to keep his promises. And so one of the things that I want us to do as a church community is that we would just see our story in light of God's story, what God is doing. And so I wanted to just ask a couple questions in closing today. Where have you seen God be faithful in your life? Can you look back and see where God has met you powerfully and where he has worked for your good? And then today, where are you struggling right now? Where are you hurting? Where's your pain? And will you cry out to the God who hears? Do you trust him to be faithful to you today?